computers and stuff. When I got my master's degree, the university didn't even have a computer. Actually, they had what they called it, a computing room, where you'd go in and they were hand cranked. They were analog. They were hand cranked machines, if you can believe that. So when you put the computers together with with advances in statistical analysis, um, that the topics they could cover increasingly became more and more general. There's a hierarchical linear modeling, that's what most people use now for large data sets, but it doesn't, given the numbers that are required to be able to test a hypothesis around a specific variable, it's impractical to answer many questions about what happens in a classroom. And so that's when I started getting interested in, well, there's got to be a complementary research endeavor done at the classroom level. I mean, it's not like, okay, this large scale, large numbers approach, that's not good. No, it is good. We should look at that. And kind of the ultimate large scale approach is meta-analytic, where you put together a whole bunch. That stuff's really, really important. But what doesn't exist yet, and that's the attempt that Marzano Research is trying to do right now, is to say, well, let's create, a whole other endeavor at the classroom level done by classroom teachers, using the most advanced methodologies we have, but also with the injection of practical knowledge of what happens in a classroom and what are the things that are important to the classroom. So it's a real nice marriage of strengths that already exist in the world of social sciences, and now trying to create something that would complement that. So I compliment you on being fellows. I just have to add one thing. I'm at my house, and my wife is she's an invalid, and the caretaker has left already. So it very unlikely, but she might call for me if that. I might have to run, and it would just take a few seconds, but I doubt that'll happen. And Julia, you saw the guitar. I learned to play the guitar from Don McLean. You know who he is?
I don't.
He American Pie.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Yes, I
yeah.
know
Well,
that.
yeah. Well, I went to college with him. He would not
Oh,
remember me, but I followed him around like a little puppy because he used to give free concerts, and he was a great guitarist and songwriter. So anyway, that's how and then he used to actually, give kind of free lessons to people. And so he's got a real unique style. So I played for
interesting.
20 years and then let it sit for 30 years. And so during the pandemic, I said, I got to dust this thing off. And so I'm just kind of getting to the place where, what I do actually kind of approaches sounding like music. It's been a long, arduous endeavor.
Excellent.
The
Yeah, there's an ebb and flow for sure with that sort of thing.
uh, so so Matt's told me about in general terms your projects. They both sound really interesting. I'm kind of curious as to uh, from your perspective, what do if I so understand, you're looking at collaborative learning techniques and its effect on discourse in the classroom, more mathematical. And then Julie, you're the use of a glockenspiel, which I had to look up. I didn't know what they look like. I'd heard the term. But you're going to look at whether actually using a physical one versus a virtual one. And what's the outcome you're looking to study?
Well, I'm really hoping to see if there's a difference in growth between using, well, what the growth would look like comparing the virtual instrument versus the in-person glockenspiel.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
And measure by what?
There, yeah. So I have a rubric that I'm working with, and then using just an ordinal scale. So having it's a little bit challenging because they're having to look at music that they've not looked at before, music that they've never heard. So to be able to assess it is a little bit different from what it would be if I were just say looking at an exam or something like that.
Yeah,
So
of course. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so looking at an ordinal scale and basing that off of the rubric, hoping that they'll have grown by 2 points according to wherever they are
Okay.
already within the
Very nice.
class. So
So Julia,
Fausto, how are you going to measure math discourse?
Well, basically, what the main purpose that I have is I want to see how the collaborative protocol, the moment the kids are discussing, debating on their answers, on the processes that they have followed to solve the problems, I want to measure if this approach of collaborative discussion improves the conceptual understanding, not only the basic algorithm that people usually follow, to solve problems, and it becomes a little bit mechanical. And I'm using something that we create, and it's very similar to what you propose in your proficiency scales. I have developed some proficiency scales. It's like the same thing like that you do, like 3.0, 2.0,
I got
3.0, 4.0, but we call it the 2.0, the surface level, 3.0, the deep level, and the 4.0, the transfer level, using some of the knowledge that the John Hattie has proposed and some of his ideas. No, but this is what I use to see if kids are really showing this conceptual understanding. No.
Yeah, very nice. That's very nice. I've become a big fan of, or maybe I'll go the other way. I've become a critic of getting too narrow in the outcome you're hypothesizing, will be effective, because I think we get so stuck on, well, the outcome has to be academic growth or academic achievement, and even measured in a specific way, with some type of kind of traditional test where I think more often than not, especially when you're talking about classroom instructional strategies, the direct outcomes they will have, they're not that first level of direct outcomes is not necessarily their increased performance on some assessment of a particular academic area. That it's really a network of effects.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times that the classroom level research, we say, well, we did this, but boy, it didn't show up on this test of fractions, therefore it didn't work. But in fact, the intervention that was being looked at, it was designed to stimulate more discourse, and discourse at a deeper level, and that will certainly, cascade down to, growth or higher achievement on some type of traditional test. But but there are also intervening variables there that have to be in place, for it to show up there. So I think that paradigm, to keep that in mind, really helps set up studies where you do discover that strategies have a certain effect, but it's not necessarily on, some traditional test on traditional academic content. So I think this is just wide open. There's this whole arena of hypothesizing, what the effect will be. And, I was going to say it wasn't that long ago, but wasn't that long ago from my perspective. Where the U.S. Department of Education, Institute for Educational Sciences, they started requiring logic models for studies. And logic model, or theory of action, I think it's also called. It's really just kind of mapping that out. In that I'm saying, okay, if I do this, here's going to be the first level effect. Here's going to be the next level effect. And I think that just that exercise, will help bring clarity to, our field, and that. And the field is classroom interactions, classroom instruction. What produces the best results defined in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I said any of that, but it had a purpose in the beginning. I can't remember what it was.
So Fausto has a unique situation in that he will not actually be teaching
That's right.
the classes that the study will be implemented in, but will be supporting, is it like two teachers who will be conducting two multiple group design experiments? So each will have an experimental group who will be implementing the structured collaboration like protocol, and then they'll also have a business as usual class. Am I reflecting that accurately, Fausto?
Yes, yes, you're right, Matt. And something interesting is that I have decided to work with two teachers because they have a difference. Now, one teacher, Santiago, his name, is an experienced teacher. He has a lot of experience. As a matter of fact, he has become an expert teacher, as we call it in our school, because he's doing amazing things with the kids. The impact he has on the kids it's amazing on the learning. And there is a new teacher who is very talented, but he's very young. And I want to see the results. Now, what happens when a very experienced teacher applies the protocol, and what happens when a new teacher who doesn't have much experience but who is talented applies the strategy.
What's
I'm
your
curious how you feel.
hypothesis?
I'm sorry, Matt.
Go ahead, Bob.
I'm curious how you feel about, creating a community of classroom level researchers, scholars. How do you see that? That part excites me. But how do you see that playing out? Or what are your drive? What would you like to have it turn into? How do you envision it?
Well, basically, what I want is I want my teachers, because I'm the vice principal in this institution. I want my teachers to see education not only as as a classroom experience, but as a research experience. Because there are some teachers who are worried about delivering good instruction, or they learn methodologies, they understand how to use the curriculum, the standards, and things like those. But sometimes they're not so aware on how they are impacting on their students learning, if what they are doing is really working, if the kids are really learning. So I want the teachers to assume this kind of more research lens, so that they don't only teach the lesson, they don't only evaluate the students, but they also question their work and how effective they are on the students' learning. No.
Nice. Yeah.
It provides like a wonderful anchor around which those teachers can have conversations about their practice, right? Because they're implementing the same strategy, implementing the same sort of assessments to measure growth. I can just imagine there'll be really fruitful and interesting conversations that they might be able to have.
How about you, Julia? What in terms of the community of researchers?
Well, I was thinking about what you said a little bit ago. You said you didn't know why you said what you said. And I think it's really important to keep in mind. So my experience lately has been, and in the past, has been that teachers sort of bristle at the thought of, one, doing more, and two, having something that's, just thinking about that academic piece. And so what you said spoke a lot to me, because I was thinking about just the greater, the greater effect that some of these implementations have, such as having these conversations, and how important they can be to the overall growth of the student, and not just in a certain academic area. But just thinking about that, I think for me, I think the important thing for me right now is keeping in mind, and you'll have to forgive me, my students had a concert last night and I got home so late. It's concert season in Music Land and I'm exhausted. So just keeping in mind that the academic piece is not necessarily the one that I'm striving for. And then also having these conversations with other teachers, that just because we are trying to implement research within the classroom at this level does not mean that we're sticklers for just looking at the academic components, and that we really are, our goal is also to facilitate the growth of the entire student. And I think that's sometimes just lost on educators. So
I think that's the thing that's so exciting about the fellowship, the opportunity
Right.
to work with the two of you. We've implemented this model in other places, but when we implement it more broadly with larger numbers, we have to be more limited in the options we give teachers and the opportunities that we have here with you to really think about different designs, to think about measuring different variables and bringing those, the analysis of Fausto, for example, the analysis of these two multiple designs is going to be very interesting. And it's going to be a little bit of a challenge for us because it doesn't fit our current models. So we're going to have to do some playing around, but that's exciting, to be able to really think about and play with some different options here, not only measuring non-academic variables, and figuring out a way to put that into the analysis, but also different ways of putting the data together, and analyzing the data in different ways, to reveal some other variables. So I think that's one of the things that's really exciting for us working with you too.
I've also formed the opinion that it seems to me, like in K-12 education, that both administrators and teachers kind of operate from the perspective that if someone else it tells them this is the right thing to do based on evidence, they'll believe that, but kind of their own reasoning, and experience gets discounted. And I think along with that, there's this belief that we live in this era of, oh my gosh, there's so many studies out there that we really know what to do, with the rigorous research. But actually, kind of, the IES practice guides, you know what they are? What works, actually, if you Google just IES practice guides, it comes out of What Works Clearinghouse, and what they wanted to do is because What Works, that's where people submit their studies, and I think there have been like over 700 of those since it started 20 years ago. But what they realized is that they want to make it more usable by the practitioner. So they got experts in the various areas to read all these studies and come up with recommendations, and they're put together in these practice guides. They're wonderful. I mean, you click on IES and there's 29 practice guides there, and it's really impressive stuff. And each one of those 29 practice guides has recommendations. And all told, there's 146 recommendations made across 29 practice guides. Now, kind of an interesting thing to do. And for each one of those recommendations, they rate the level of rigor using the ESSA scale, and using the IES scale, the What Works scale. And a real simple little study is to go through and say, well, let's count up how many out of those 146 recommendations, what percent had the highest level of rigor all the way down. Okay. If you do that, here's what you'll find. I'll just use ESSA, that only about 18% of their recommendations have the highest level of rigor. Okay. And the most recommendations have the lowest level of rigor. And in the ESSA scale, that's correlational research. No, excuse me. In the ESSA scale, that's it has a strong logic for it in some correlational research. Now, what that says to me is that after 20 years, of all this research, that if we only use those things that have the highest level of rigor, which is by definition randomized controlled trials, it's going to be a long, long time before we can use anything. And some things don't even lend themselves to RCTs. Now, I'm not obviously bad-mouthing that research. That's really important stuff. But if IES could come up with 146 recommendations and not always rely on the highest level, that says something to me in terms of, well, of course, use your practical knowledge, to generate hypotheses and generate conclusions. The same thing happened in the turn of the millennium. There used to be programs called the Comprehensive School Reform Models. And I forgot, there was like 30 or 40 of them or something like that. And somebody did actually a meta-analysis of all of those, and they had 1,100 effect sizes for these things. When they looked at the distribution of effect sizes, 35% were below zero, which means that the control group outperformed the experimental group. Again, and when they explain, and plus they found that to get the most stable effect sizes took 5 years for an intervention. Now these were big interventions, for the whole school, and all of that is to say that, well, yeah, of course you start with the most rigorous research you can find, but also don't forget that human beings do research, every day. They really do. They generate hypotheses and they try something and see if it works. And all of that put together probably gives your best results. And so I see the teacher as researcher falling into that, so to creating this whole body of knowledge that, and you're using great statistical techniques. I mean, the tool that Trudy and David and others created. I mean, that's sophisticated stuff, but it's still, you still sprinkle just your common knowledge and your just experiential base in terms of making decisions about what works and what doesn't.
I think you said something really interesting there a little bit earlier, Bob, where you said that there's almost been a shift where teachers are now in a position where they want someone to tell them what to do, rather than relying on their own experience and thoughts and feelings. To me, this is a case where policymakers have sort of beaten this into teachers.
That's, yeah.
But we need to reverse that.
Yeah.
We can't, as a profession, rely on someone else to tell us what to do. We're professionals, and it's our responsibility, I believe, to constantly be examining and reflecting on our practice.
Yeah.
For personal improvement. But until we can do that in a structured and systematic way, I'm not sure anyone's going to trust us to.
Yeah. Good point. I agree. And I think that this effort, though, is, because there's so many nice parts to it. And as the numbers grow, I think it will be a really loud voice. Excuse me, I tell a lot of personal stories. Maybe I tell too much, but this recently happened. I said my wife's an invalid. 6.5 years ago, she had a really bad stroke, and then but then just in June, she had what looked like another stroke. But they were debating as to whether it was a stroke. Now she's doing fine, okay. But they were debating as to whether it was a stroke or she had seizures. And they're two very different things and both very, very dangerous. And I kept saying, what is it? Because it's a different protocol if it's a seizure in terms of how you make, because you don't want that stuff to happen again. And so finally, the third neurologist, I said to her, I said, would you please just give me your best answer? What do you think it was? And here's what she said. She said, well, Mr. Marzano, medicine you should think of as both art and science. Now, I wrote a book once called The Art and Science of Teaching, and I wanted to say I read the book, but I mean it really. But she was being honest with me. Yeah, she said, and this is definitely in the art part. We really, really don't know. It could be this, and it could be this, and I thought, wow, once again. The world of, hard data, but also there's, and so they she made a recommendation based on the hard data, but also what in her experience, said, I think this is what's going on. And it's worked out really well, by the way.
And hopefully we've communicated that throughout the research design workshops. I think I've said several times that this is not intended to be instructional improvement via algorithm, but rather we are relying on you to use your professional judgment to interpret and make sense of the effect sizes and to use your professional judgment as a professional educator and other sort of data that you might be collecting about how students are responding to the strategy, how students are showing up in the class, their level of engagement, some things that may not show up on your pre and your post assessment, but is still like valid data that you can use to make some professional judgments about whether this strategy is having the desired impact on student outcomes that you hoped it would. So, I mean, that's again one of the reasons why we're really excited about this approach is we think it's a way to like elevate the teaching profession, which isn't to say, you know, as Bob just mentioned, that we're not like discounting sort of what we can learn from randomized control trials, but that more than one thing can be true at the same time, right? And so I think we see this as a bit of like a deductive and inductive sandwich, right? Sort of the deductive stuff is the stuff that we can learn from sort of the studies that the What Works Clearinghouse reviews. And the inductive piece is what you're learning as like teacher researchers in the classroom, and the interaction between those two can be really powerful. Just imagine what we can learn if we were to do this sort of systematically and system wide.
So I'm curious, Julie and Fausto, you guys are in the process of preparing for your first cycle here. Are there any sticking points in your plans? Or is there any place where you need to hear someone else's voice to help you figure out what's going on? Where are you at, and how can we dig into Bob's brain and help you solve problems here?
It's not going to help.
Fausto, do you want to go, or should I jump in?
Go, please, Julie.
Okay. I've got a couple sticking points. One of them is within my own head, and that is we decided on this study design. And I can't get past the idea that an original idea could potentially give me clearer results. So the study that we're doing is, okay, so I'm having my students work through, I'm giving them their initial assessment, and then they're going to use their virtual instruments. And then later I'm going to introduce the in-person instruments. The original idea was to have fourth and fifth graders. So I think it's a block design where I would have students using half the students in one class using glockenspiel in person and the other using the virtual, and then the other class kind of doing the same thing and then looking at those results. They're two different grades. However, looking at how, I'm trying to figure out how to say this so it's totally clear, looking at how just comparing those two results, just the virtual and the glockenspiel, versus looking at it from how we decided to do the study, which was, okay, virtual, then in person. The reason why I feel like the first idea was stronger, though Jim said that it potentially introduced bias, is because I know that I'm pretty sure they're going to grow anyway using the virtual glockenspiel, and I'm just not sure how accurately my measurement's going to be. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that first. That's my first.
Remember with that single case design, which is what you're talking about,
Yes.
you know, virtual and then then your business as usual versus your experimental intervention with the same class. You're going to see growth with that virtual glockenspiel. I mean, you're providing instruction, you're introducing, so you're going to see growth. What you're really doing is comparing the rate of growth or the amount of growth during those 2 periods of time. And presumably we would see during that experimental period of time a greater amount of growth than you would during that control time. And so it's looking at that, the comparing of those two effect sizes to see whether or not one was more effective than the other. You know, I think the concern that we've had with the fourth versus fifth is we don't have baseline equivalence. Our two groups are going to be so different from each other just because they're fourth and fifth graders that we really aren't going to be able to compare those results anyway.
That I understand. However, if we're looking at the growth, like their baseline within their grade, you know, so this group is working quarter notes, this group is working 16th notes. they're starting at a different, like I'm still looking at their growth within where they are. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And again, I talked so much last night at that show
Right.
for my students. I'm so sorry, everyone.
So if we're not doing a direct comparison,
Right.
if you were doing two single case designs,
Uh-huh.
one single case design with the fourth graders, one single case design with the fifth
Mm-hmm.
graders, what it does is it gives you, you can't necessarily compare those two because the two
Mm-hmm.
groups aren't the same, but it's almost like doubling, you're doing two studies at the same time. You're
Mm-hmm.
increasing the amount of data that you have to make some judgments on.
Mm-hmm.
I think we were all uncomfortable with the idea of a
Yeah.
multiple case design in which you're directly comparing the fourth and fifth graders.
Right.
This could also be
Yeah, go ahead.
this could also be a case where you can have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
Right. So
Uh-huh.
and that's one of the reasons why we've built in like two cycles into
Mm-hmm.
the fellowship. So it could be that for this cycle, you use a single case design, and then at the
Mm-hmm.
end of it, you step back and you reflect on what you were able to learn through a single case design, sort of given the constraints in which you are working.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe at that point, you decide, you know what, I want to see what I can learn using sort of a multiple group design. And if some
Mm-hmm.
of the concerns related to baseline equivalence and some of the other sort of content founding variables maybe sort of impact what you learn. And
Right.
then sort of by at the end of the year, you've had the experience with single case and multiple case designs. And then sort
Mm-hmm.
of moving forward, maybe you got a favorite.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I like
Yeah.
that idea. More,
Your
more.
your point's well taken, though. You're right. And David said you're looking at the rate of growth. That's what should go up. But a problem with that is just assuming that growth is linear all the way through the learning process, that it's the same slope. You know, that but you can a lot of cognitive psych people say it's not linear, it's curvilinear growth, that actually you learn a lot in the beginning, but then it tends to flatten out. And they use different mathematical models.
Mm-hmm.
Linear growth is kind of the regular old, slope, intercept, all that stuff. And then nonlinear would be a oh more of a quadratic equation that's used. The but you can play with all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, you could analyze the two slopes, um, and then put it all together and see if a power function fits. Um,
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you for being patient with that idea too.
No worries.
Again, Julie, this is a chance for us to play around with some different things too, and that's what's exciting to us. It
Mm-hmm.
really is, and I appreciate that both of you are willing to just be open and willing to try some different things, and let us just sort of talk through different options and try something, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll try something different. So that's what's exciting for us with the fellowship.
Thank you.
Fausto?
Well, something that I wanted to ask, because I have had some meetings with my teachers, okay, but as part of being a leader, it's my responsibility to also give them the freedom they need to do what they think it works for them. No, for example, I just explained I want you to think about the protocol that you use in collaborative work, but which one do you think it's the best for you? So although I gave him the general idea, but they ended up creating their own protocols, and both are different. No? This teacher is using one which fits to his experience, and the other teacher created one that thinks works for him. So, but one of the discussions we had, because we are working at this moment on preparing the pre-assessment, one of the questions that appeared was, what can we do to reduce the number of intervening variables so that the results that we obtain are as valid as possible. No, for example, they were mentioning, because I chose that the teachers create their own pre-assessment and post-assessment. Okay, they don't use something that is created. But one of the teachers told me, what if instead of I create my own assessment, what if the other teacher, Santiago, creates my assessment and I create the assessment for Santiago to reduce this intervening variable that you are the one that teaches, but you are the one who assesses yourself. No, what if the other person does the assessment? It was something interesting that we discussed, and there is a teacher who is also concerned about the balance between, we want the students to go to a higher level of understanding. We want them to have a very deep conceptual understanding of math, but they also need to continue practicing the procedure, the algorithm. So sometimes we have to get into a balance. No, if I kind of have more focus on conceptual understanding, maybe I don't give enough time to practice the algorithm. So they are the discussions that have been part of our meetings. But I just wanted to ask you about this idea of intervening variables. What can we do to reduce the number of intervening variables so that the teachers feel comfortable with the results?
In terms of the assessment, why wouldn't you create a common assessment? Why wouldn't they, instead of each one creating their own, is that possible? Where they get together and create a common assessment and then score the assessments commonly too?
Yeah. Well, this is something that we discussed today, and that's why we saw it as a possibility. We have a meeting on Thursday, as a matter of tomorrow, and we're going to get together the two teachers with me and with a math specialist who is going to help us also, create the best possible common assessment. So we haven't even thought about it, but now that you tell me, I think that we're gonna take it as a more powerful approach.
And common assessments in themselves create a type of collaboration and dialogue amongst the teachers. And then if you score it commonly, and because I thought what you said is somebody else creates the test for my students, but if you created the test in common and then maybe have the protocol where you say, okay, but I don't get to score my test. That I'm not part of the group that scores the results for my students. Like that. I mean, that shores it up the rigor quite a bit in terms of your dependent variable.
Perfect.
Or measure.
I think I love the idea, and we're going to do it. Yes. Thank you.
What else?
Math, you are mute.
Yeah, I was saying something really clever. Too bad.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It was brilliant, Matt.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I think there's an opportunity to also rethink how we're conceptualizing this experiment, right? So I think the way that we're thinking about it right now is it's sort of one experiment being implemented by two teachers in 4 classes. Another way to think about it is you have 2 separate classroom-based experiments where they're testing a related strategy, but not the same strategy. Because I thought what I heard is that teachers have the freedom and flexibility to design a collaborative learning protocol on their own. So it isn't necessarily a common protocol. And if that's the case, if you have these 2 separate experiments where they're testing related but not exactly the same strategy, then maybe that relieves the pressure on creating a common assessment. Although, to like Bob's point, just the process of creating that common assessment can be something that brings a lot of value to the teachers anyways.
Okay. I think, though, if you are going to use 2 different protocols, if you're going to allow the teachers the flexibility and freedom to create their own protocol, then there is value in keeping the assessment the same, keeping as many of the other pieces of the study the same as possible, because that allows you to at least, maybe not statistically, but logically be able to almost compare those 2 results to determine whether or not one of these protocols maybe was better than the other, and have some conversations about the strengths and weaknesses of the 2 protocols if everything else in the study is the same. So I think I would suggest, if you do want to look at two different protocols, definitely do a common assessment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your suggestions. And the last question that I had, I mentioned, what would be your suggestion related to the idea of, because the teachers have only 1 month to apply the cycle, no? And but as I told you, they are worried about the idea that they want them to have the students to have deeper understanding, conceptual understanding, but they also need time to practice the algorithm. So, what can you tell me about it? I don't know. I would like to know.
Obviously, frequency of implementation is critical here. The more times you can implement whatever your intervention is, the more likely that intervention has a chance to have an impact, to take an effect. So you want to be able to do it frequently. That doesn't mean that during that class period that the only thing the student is doing is having a conversation about their math. If you did it for 20 minutes, I'm just going to make guesses. An hour class period, if you did conversations about math for 20 minutes and you did that every day, you would likely have an effect, just because there's because you have more frequent opportunities to do that. That allows you 40 minutes within every class period to do some of that other practice that needs to happen and occur. So just keep in mind that this isn't the only thing that's happening within a given class period, and that it's in fact shorter periods of time, shorter interventions done more often, I think is more likely to have an impact than a longer period of time done less often. Mm-hmm. I don't think I said that very well. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. I understood that the frequency is possibly very relevant at this point. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
What type of protocols, can you give me a feel for the protocols that teachers are developing around the discourse? Because it's all around dialogue, right?
Well,
discourse.
In general, the idea is, well, everyone has his own idea, no? But in general, they have something in common. Students have to solve a specific exercise or problem the teacher proposes.
Got it.
They first do it individually. Okay, they try to do it individually. Once they have done it individually, the students have to share their ideas, how they did it. If they discuss about the answers, if the answer is right, they discuss about the process they used, the strategies they used. And in this discussion, they kind of compare the answers, they kind of debate, and they try to, in a way, use the critical thinking skills to support their point on why my answer is better than yours, why my process is better than yours. And this is basically the main part of the discourse, of the analysis, the dialogue that we want the kids to have about the problem they discuss.
Okay. Yeah, I think the discourse is real. It's wide open in terms, and I think it's kind of a missed area because, but I still get in classrooms. I'm in classrooms every week. Because we work with schools really, really, really closely, and we're actually kind of studying discourse and the type of discourse, and in general, the collaborative, in the interactions between students is good, obviously, because they're sharing their ideas, but a lot of times it kind of stops at that. Teachers will use collaborative strategies, like Kagan has a whole bunch of really great strategies, Spencer Kagan, and it certainly gets students talking. But that doesn't mean that the talk develops a deeper knowledge of the content. So I would say that the protocol, you might tell your teachers, the protocol should also look at what does the teacher do? It's not just putting them and say, share your ideas. And actually, we've been playing around with a kind of a protocol that goes something like this, if you don't mind. It's like, whatever, you use a problem. The students do the problem, they answer the problem, they talk about it like that. That's kind of first level of analysis. So that's where we use your Kagan strategies. But then the next level would be the teacher now starting to ask questions of the whole class. But the purpose of the questions is to unpack the content for the students. So the teacher has to have thought through this type of problem. Gee, what are the critical components? And you ask questions that get at that. And as the students answer, that teachers do kind of two things. One is to restate or rephrase the strong ideas students have, or the generalizations that are happening, or the facts, but the teacher restates it or rephrases it. So it really galvanizes that. Also, what the teacher is looking for is common errors and misconceptions, and highlights those too. And so you're trying to raise the notion of making a mistake to a different level now. That it's really a good thing to recognize our mistakes, because this tells us what not to do. And I don't know where I got this, but there was a teacher who had she called it my favorite no, which was my favorite mistake. And they would actually record them. And I just thought that was genius, because but it was that teacher intervention. So I guess again, the short answer I'm trying to say is the collaborative strategies are powerful, but I don't think that they really necessarily get to this deep level. I think you need some teacher intervention, to guide that discourse. And we're looking for two things, really good ideas and generalizations, and then they restate those. And I've even seen teachers, use choral response too, and it might be, Bobby, well, look what he said. That's really good. Now let's all say that, and same thing with the mistakes. And I think that's a missing piece to the kind of the discourse level strategies. And it is the most common thing that goes on in the classroom. It really is. I mean, that interaction, they do something, let's talk about it. Do something, ask a question, let's talk about it. But it really kind of stops at that. If they've shared the results, that it's all good. It's better than not sharing, but it doesn't get to the deeper levels.
Well,
I hope that helped a little bit.
We do two things. The teachers are expected to intervene when the kids are working in the groups, paying attention to what they say, what they do, and when they feel that they have to intervene and say something to kind of, create some type of imbalance, cognitive imbalance, they are supposed to do it. And the other is when the discussion, the group discussion has finished, they have to also have a kind of whole class discussion to collect all the points of views and all, and they kind of try to summarize the learnings of the day, the most important things they have understood that day. So there is a teacher intervention, yes.
Good, very nice, very nice.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Marzano.
I'm going to have to get off, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Bob, and thank you, David, as well. And we're at time, so I think it's time to wrap up, anyways. But thank you so much.
Okay, well, Fausto, Julia, good luck. Hope we talk later.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marzano. Nice to meet you.
Bye-bye. Fausto, hopefully that was helpful to get some sort of input from David and Bob. We thought this today was all about just creating time and space for some good conversations.
No, thank you so much. It was very useful.
Yeah, fantastic. Again, feel free to, please reach out if you have any questions as you continue to sort of process the stuff that we talked about today. Julia, if you're like, yeah, you still haven't convinced me to do single case design. Like, I want to go back to original idea. Like, this is your work. We're just here to support. So if you want some help sort of rethinking like the design of your experiment, like just let us know. We're happy to help out with that.
Thank you. And I want you to know that I do very much trust your opinion. There's just this little nagging, that so when you said more, yes, go ahead, and I can have I'll take the and if I have time to implement it all, because that's always what it comes down to, I think, right? But thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. So have a good night. Have a great sort of winter holiday. And I think we have another one of these meetings on our schedule sometime in January. Again, we hope to have some additional fellows join us in our next coaching and networking session. But again, sort of reach out if you got any questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right. Take care and good night.
You too. Bye.
A great holiday.
You too.